You're listening to The Russell Scott Show.
Dr. Rita Louise, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me on, Russell. It's great to be here with you and your listeners.
For the audience who doesn't know who you are, who is Dr. Rita Louise?
Well, I have been working in the, I'm going to say, alternative thought field, or have been interested in alternative thought, wherever that may have been, actually since the time I was 8. With an interest in things like archaeology and human origins and ESP and astrology and human potential. And it's just something that has always fascinated me and made me understand myself, understand life, understand humanity. And I don't know, I'm not sure where I'm going with that, but I'm going somewhere. But, I like to joke around where my day job is that I work as a medical intuitive. I'm a naturopathic physician, but I am able to assess the physical body and the emotional body using my intuition. So I have a lot of people that come to me that have health concerns and need some guidance and insight, but that doesn't keep away the people that, are having problems in their relationships or having problems at work and need to get some guidance and insight into what's going on, the dynamics of what's going on. I call myself an energy girl because I really am able to see the energy and the dynamics of what's happening. I might not be able to say, well, it's this specifically, but I can usually give you enough of an insight of what it looks like, what it feels like, because, the energy balance will leave you with a feeling. And so it's different every day. I love what I do, for my day job. But I also really enjoy writing and researching and reading books that people look at me like, are you serious? I just finished reading the Ramayana and really enjoyed it, which I didn't think I would, but I really did enjoy it. And so my latest endeavor, I've written books on metaphysical thought. I've written books on energy healing. My last book was a book about ghosts and ghost hunting and dealing with ghostly phenomena if you happen to have it in your house. But my latest book took me on a trek into the, and I'm just going to say it in a generic way, kind of the ancient alien theory, like you see on that TV show, Ancient Aliens. And that is where I am today.
Well, your latest book, Man-Made, The Chronicles of Our Extraterrestrial Gods. What made you decide to write this book?
One of the things that happened was we were watching TV shows, and this was a few years ago when they first started coming out with the TV shows about 2012. And one of the things they would say on these shows was, well, this is what the Mayans say. And in the Hindu tradition, they agree with it. And in the Egyptian tradition, they agree with it too. But they never gave the meat of what the traditions actually said. And I'm about the meat. And so I started going online and looking up stuff and was kind of getting that what they were saying wasn't 100% true. And I started to read some Hindu classic texts, the Vishnu Purana in particular. And one of the stories that was in the Vishnu Purana was the story about Manu and the fish, which sounded remarkably like the story of Noah's flood, remarkably, which kind of took me on a different twist where I started looking at flood stories from around the world. Now, with that said, there are many people, or this was my belief, and I'll just say this was my belief. You hear that there are flood stories all around the world. Okay, that's great. But if my backyard is flooding and you have a river flooding, by your house, and they have these big waves happening on the East Coast, like with the hurricane, our stories are all going to be different. What we did, how we survived it, the nature of the flood, it's me and my cousin, or, they're going to be different by nature.
If we weren't living in the 21st century, the actions of Hurricane Sandy very well may have become one of these flood myths.
Correct. But they would be different. Like the story of Hurricane Sandy is going to be different than the story that comes out of Southeast Asia when they had the tsunami.
Right.
By nature, because they're different. They're different storms. They all have their own characteristic. But what we found was when you look at that flood myth, it fell into a very finite category of explanations. There was a righteous, pious, or virtuous man who is warned about a flood. He builds an ark, a boat, a canoe, climbs on a leaf, cuts down a tree, climbs on the tree, climbs the tree, or climbs to the top of a mountain. It's him and his brother, maybe him and his wife, him and his sister, a little kinky. Sometimes, there's a very finite, like 2 or 3, 4 people, adults that survive. In some of the stories, their children are joined with them. Sometimes there are animals. And in some of the stories, a bird is released to let them know that there is dry land available for them to repopulate. But those elements are all found in the Noah story. And so when you find a story that has the look and feel of the Noah story, except it's being told by the Incas in South America, it makes you go, huh? I mean, I can understand if, they had a similar story, like there's the Sumerian Epic of Gilgamesh, where they recreate or you find out about the flood in that narrative. And then there's the Noah story. And I can understand where in Egypt you might have a similar story because there's a geographical connection and the stories could move along trade routes. I mean, you could conceptualize a reason. But when you're finding that same story in the Americas, and what was interesting is, like this group of Indians climbed a mountain, but this group of Indians made a boat. And then you get down in South America and Mesoamerica, this one's climbing a tree, so it wasn't like this geographical area, they're all climbing the mountain. And in this geographical area, they're all climbing a tree. It was just kind of this mixed up hodgepodge of stories. But again, and I'm being really serious with the components of what these stories told. It was extremely finite. So with that in hand, I was like, well, the flood in the big picture of things is really kind of, I don't want to say the end of the story, but we're well into the story of human origin by that point in time. And so we decided to go back to, quote unquote, in the beginning, and move forward in time and start looking at mythology from around the world to see if we were continuing to see these parallels. And what we ended up with was something that I would liken to an Excel spreadsheet with different events and then the cultural myths that fit into these different boxes, because we found that there were themes that flowed through the myths that gave you the opportunity to say, okay, so if the flood story is a theme, a common theme, here's everybody's flood stories. But what happened before the flood? What caused the flood? What happened after the flood? And so we organized things in that way. And what we ended up with was coming out with really kind of a timeline and chronology of the gods.
What do you believe the age of mankind is? Have we been here for 100 million years? 10,000?
I believe that mankind in its current form of what, we can call a sentient being, and I'm being very conservative, it is 1.5 million years, with the other end of it being about 3 million years.
Okay, so you wouldn't necessarily subscribe to the Klaus Donna 100 million years.
See, I have not heard that number from him. I believe that there was a race of beings that existed on this planet prior to what we would classify as the biblical mankind, the Adam and Eve.
If it's not human, then what is it?
Well, based on mythology, there was a group of giants that lived on the earth prior to mankind and coexisted with mankind on the planet. They were some of the ones that were annihilated by the flood.
The Nephilim, the giants, are these the progenitors?
No. No, 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 no.
Learn,
They
Dr. Reed. I need to learn this stuff.
Okay. I mean, the progenitors, we believe, actually came to this universe, or not this universe, this galaxy, 4.5 billion years ago. We believe that they did not come to the Earth originally, but started terraforming a different planet. They created a race of giants. In Greek mythology, they're known as the Titans. This race of giants were big. Okay, not any 8-foot, 12-foot tall being, but actually, you know, they're described as being as big as a tree, as big as a mountain. You know, so these are ginormous beings. You know, but they are, the way that it seems, a subservient race. They are told this is how you should behave. And I'm taking all of these myths and trying to condense it into, you know, one storyline, because there are subtle variations, you know, and so we're picking the one that seems to be the most cohesive, or combining them together. But we present everything, you know, and I just want to say that we present all the myths in the book. We let the myths tell the story. And so these are conclusions that we reached. You know, it might not be a conclusion that someone reading the book might reach, although we feel pretty good with kind of where we're going.
The idea here is, if that the same story is reiterated, told in many different fables, there must be some element of truth to it.
Right. You know, but in some of the stories, for example, there's the progenitor gods, and they have a race of gods, you know, and they describe them as their children. You know, in other mythologies, they are created. You know, in other mythologies, they don't even look, you know what I mean? And so how do you sit there and identify the relationships between them, you know, or in some of them, one group usurps the other group. In another storyline, they battle, and the usurping group is kicked out. You know what I mean? And so it's kind of like you still get the essence, but it's not 100%, and you have to make a certain amount of supposition, or you have to pick one, you know. And so we're picking one, and I'm going to say it that way because really we're picking one. And we don't really have evidence or proof, but I think you get a really good feel for the dynamics and the relationships and what's going on, more than you get from the Bible. I mean, the Bible literally leaves out the first part of our mythological history entirely, and just comes in the very end, or it condenses it into like one line, you know, or two lines, and that's it. So anyway, so they make this group of gods. After a while, they get tired of it, and they revolt against the progenitor gods. In many of the myths, this group leaves, and, you know, in Sumerian mythology, Enki creates his abode in the watery deep, in the Abzu. In Greek mythology, they go to Tartarus. But one of the things that happens is that the originating world ends. You know, there is a catastrophe that happens, and that world dies. And we believe that that was a true statement, that that world did come to an end, and a new world, literally, was created. Or, you know, they started terraforming that new world. You know, they didn't get very far in the old world. And that world, what the gods that lived on that world, and I'm just going to keep using, you know, that small g god, not the progenitor gods, but the offspring, the creation, these giant beings of the progenitor gods, set up shop on this new planet. We believe that they either lived underground or under the water. And they, you know, one of the stories that comes out of this time period is the Indian story of the churning of the Milky Ocean. And it almost sounds like they're drilling for something, and, you know, like deep sea drilling, because they take this snake and they wind him around a mountain, and they are literally churning the mountain to get something out from underneath the water. And what they're looking for is Amrita, the nectar of immortality. And they go after it for years and years and years and years. You know, we're talking thousands of years. They're drilling for this immortality, and a bunch of stuff happens. But the groups that are drilling for it, there's an alliance between the good gods, the devas, and the bad gods, the asuras. Well, once they get the Amrita, the devas trick the asuras and basically take it. And so it starts this power play of what's going on. It gets really interesting. But when you look at some of the nature of the things that they fight for, it's like they want the immortality. And then there's the concept of, in India, there's something called soma. And so in Greek mythology, they talk about ambrosia, and ambrosia will give you immortality. But then there is nectar, which is more of an intoxicating substance. And so there's this whole kind of sub-story line that runs through it of these gods really liking to get intoxicated and fighting over it, and all of this stuff happening because they just want to get intoxicated. And it really was kind of funny. But anyway, and so they're constantly battling each other, this one stealing it from this one who bumps this guy off so he can steal it. And I'm like, these are supposed to be like caring and loving gods, and all they're doing is fighting with each other and knocking each other off like some mafia kingpin, trying to keep control of his little drug trade. I mean, it's fascinating. Anyway, in the end, the good gods, the sky gods, end up having a war with the rebel group that escaped to the earth, which are the Ashura, the bad gods, quote unquote, with the sky gods winning. And one of the things that I put out there is, do we have the concept of God being good and kind and benevolent in heaven, and the devil being the bad, evil god, because the god in heaven, the sky gods, actually won the war, and it's just a little bit of propaganda on their part that they're all good and loving? Might be burning somewhere for that one, but it's possible. Anyway, so after that, they create another race, and it's a race of giants, and this group can actually live on the surface of the planet. I was on Coast to Coast the other day, and there are pieces that we just couldn't find, so that we feel like there's a couple of little holes in our research, but where do you go look for some of this stuff? And so one of the issues that we had was talking about this group of giants, because we knew that this race lived on the planet. We knew that they lived on the surface, but we really couldn't find any mythology to support it. Well, while I was on Coast to Coast the other day, this Native American elder called in. My husband was listening to the show, and he said, no, it was the chief. It wasn't just an elder. It was the chief called in and was agreeing with our assessment of history based on their traditions. And he said that the group of giants, actually, they were called the moon people because they came out at night because they had issues with the sunlight. And we can talk about the sunlight part if you want down the road. I just kind of want to get through this narrative because it's huge and complicated. But anyway, so they become kind of like the indentured servants to these gods in charge. And after a while, they get tired of it. And, they go, this is one of my favorite lines. But we're children of the gods, and we shouldn't have to do this hard work. And so that group, again, rebels against the powers that be, and a war ensues, but the sky gods win, and the rebellion is contained. And it is because of this rebellion that it is decided to create a race of man to do this work. And that's where we come in. And then, I talk about the flood, but, it kind of brings us more into biblical history, biblical timeline with the creation of man. And where we end the story is with the advent of civilization and, the advent of writing. I'm done.
Well, when you were talking about the Titans the giants, it kind of made me think of David versus Goliath. And perhaps that's a metaphorical story, from the age of the giants to the age of man.
No. Can I just say no? I mean, the story of David and Goliath is more aligned with the giants that were created that could live on the surface of the planet. Did you ever see Jason and the Argonauts, that movie?
Many times.
Okay, so I love that movie. That's like
it's
one of my
awesome,
favorite
I know.
movies. Okay, so there is Talus, the iron guy. They go to the island and Hercules steals that bobby pin looking thing, and then he, and he's, like walking around and kills. That's how big. I mean, we're talking big in size. But they were colossal in size. I mean, if you think about it, Atlas, who holds up the world, I mean, he's huge. And let me frame it this way, which I think people will get. Part of that group, the Cyclops, who's gigantic in nature. If you remember any of the shows that have the Odyssey, the Cyclops, I mean, he's not 12 foot tall. I mean, he's giant. He can pick people up in his hand and carry them around. I mean, we're talking that big.
I really enjoyed the part in your book about Genesis, and in fact, there are 2 origin stories, not one.
Mm-hmm. And that concept has really bothered scholars a lot. And there are a number of theories that have come out of that whole thing. One of them was that the first creation, and we did not include this in the book, I don't think. I don't know. I'll have to go look. I'll have to look myself up. Was that the first creation where it says, and male and female, he created them, was that they were actually created hermaphroditic in the first creation story. And then in the second creation story, they were created man and then woman. So they were 2 separate beings as opposed to a hermaphroditic having both male and female qualities in them. But the one that I liked because it was more supported. Well, it's interesting because the hermaphroditic concept does come out of mythology with the progenitor gods, because there are thoughts that they were actually hermaphroditic in nature. Anyway, I digress. But one of the other theories that came out of biblical material was that there were actually multiple creations. And when you looked at mythology from around the world, that is certainly what you find. In Mesoamerica, in the Popol Vuh, we find that they made people out of mud at first, and when it rained, they melted. And then they made them out of sticks, but they were stupid, And they make these things, but they find these issues with them. They have problems. And in the Sumerian text, it talks about they made one, but it couldn't stand up. And then they make another one, and it urinated on itself. And they made a female, and it couldn't reproduce. And so they tell these stories of these trial and errors. And we wondered if that was truly what they were trying to portray in the Bible, the trial and errors, although minimized and kind of covered up a little bit. Until they created, us, mankind, again, that 1.5 to 3 million years ago.
Listen, you say covering up, and I feel that we are living in an age of institutionalized truth, where we're to accept the common lie. In 1492, Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Now repeat after me, in 1492, and
Well, I do a presentation on this material, and I talk about how we've been brainwashed, because we, especially in the Western world, have been brainwashed into this line of thinking, and anything that falls outside, people say the box. I like to say, especially with relationship to this material, the book. And anything that falls outside the book is wrong.
And man made the Chronicles of our Extraterrestrial Gods. That's now, quote unquote, the book. Right?
Well, no, I mean the Bible book. Anything that falls outside.
I thought you were talking about your book.
Well, I'm hoping that my book becomes the Bible. keep those dollars coming.
Well,
you
I've
know,
read the Bible. Your book is far more entertaining. I'll tell you that.
Yeah. Well, I don't have any like this one begat that one. But anything that falls outside that other book, that much thicker book, is wrong. And so when I do this presentation, I ask that very question. So I have this little slide that says, "Have you been brainwashed?" And I'm like, okay, I want you to say the first thing that comes to your mind. I go, I don't want you to think about it. I want you to say the first thing. Who discovered America? You know, and you always get a 75% or more response, Columbus. And then you get those stragglers that go, well, Native Americans or the Vikings. And I always laugh and I start pointing to them and go, you thought Columbus first. And I know it. And then they kind of like get a little bit red because you know they did.
Indoctrination.
It's true. And one of the things that, and I love people that write this kind of material. You know, I love this whole topic. I love anything old. I have a minor in art history, and I really wasn't interested in studying anything that went past the Greeks. I wasn't even interested in Roman art because I just felt like they were big copycats and stole everything from the Greeks. So I didn't really have any energy for them. But anything like Greek period and older, I was just fascinated with. But one of the things that I find is that many people take the Bible and they try to justify biblical text. You know, and so, you know, and they might expand the timeline, but they still are trying to justify what they find in the Bible with other mythology. What we chose to do was to put the Bible over there on the shelf because we weren't sure how reliable as a source it was going to be. And then we did our research and started putting together our timeline and putting together the narrative, and then took the Bible and started comparing stories in the Bible to what we were finding. And what was amazing was that there were many, many parallels. And, you know, if you again, you know, take that basic storyline, the basic storyline does match. The names are changed. You know, some of the facts are erased, you know, like, But we found that in mythology everywhere. It wasn't just limited to the Bible, although the Bible really took all of our prehistory and just whited it out. One of the things that came to us in putting together this material, when we talk about mythology, the common viewpoint is mythology is our stories about the gods, you know, or they're stories about nature, or they're stories about levels of consciousness, but there are stories about something external, and we're reporting it. But when you read the stories, they don't read that way. They read in a very interesting way, especially when you get into more contemporary times, mythologically speaking, where mankind is created. Mankind is always talked about in a very subservient, kind of like your dog way. And I'm not saying that because I'm being judgmental. But they're not. Let me frame it this way. And and please excuse the example because it really is pretty politically incorrect, but I think people will get it from this position. So if I was a plantation owner living in the South in the 1700s, and I was talking about my life, and I was making a reference to my slave, I would not talk about them in an equal way. True?
Right.
But if I was a slave and there was, and I mean, slave mentality didn't necessarily have it, but there was this affinity that I looked up to my master.
Massa.
But in a, you know, not in a slave mentality, but in a honoring, you know, because you're better than me and you're, you know, I don't know where they thought, but in this, you know, they're God. You know, they're my God. The viewpoint is going to be really different. But when you read the stories, they don't come from the slave perspective. They come from the owner perspective. And so our thought was, perhaps the stories that we have in mythology are not our stories about the gods, but the gods' stories about themselves that they shared with us and we have brought into present time.
Love the book, Man-Made, The Chronicles of Our Extraterrestrial Gods. Tell me about your radio show, Just Energy Radio. You're my competitor.
Well, you know, I was sitting at the Paradigm Symposium not that long ago across the table from George Norrie, and I said that to him. It's like, yeah, I'm your competitor.
He goes, you wish.
Actually, he didn't say anything, but he smiled a little bit. I mean, Just Energy Radio covers very similar topics, everything from alternative health through UFOs. We will have been on the air 6 years this first week of January. You know, one of the areas that I am really interested in is ancient mysteries, but we really cover a broad spectrum of topics on the show. The webpage is justenergyradio.com. We have all the archives on that page, so you can go and listen to any of them for free. They're all on there's a lot on iTunes. We have started YouTubing all of our shows, and on our YouTube channel, Just Energy Radio.
And how should the audience purchase this book? Usually they go to Amazon, but as I understand, you're selling this through soulhealer.com.
I mean, we're selling it through soulhealer.com, but it is available on amazon.com and barnesandnoble.com. But if you buy it from us, it comes signed.
And you can cut out the middleman, right?
That's right. And it comes signed. And you can't get that from Amazon.
Well, I have my copy here. It's not signed.
I'm sorry. Well, you know, that's why you have to pay for it.
That's right. This is the media copy. I get the. It's been printed on some sort of ancient 80s photocopier.
Well, I thought it was like in cuneiform on stone myself. Ooh, could you imagine that shipping cost?
Hey, listen, to the audience, pick up the book because it kicks ass. This guest is great, Dr. Rita Louise. Thank you so much for being on the program.
Well, thanks for having me, Russell. You are a hoot.
Well, thank you. That's a first.